Can I congratulate my honourable friend, the honourable member for Aberavon, who I thought made an excellent start to the debate to kick us off today. And of course, he speaks from great knowledge, given the location of the Port Talbot Steelworks in his own constituency. And he described the government's approach to this so far as warm words and frozen actions. And he made a very powerful case, I thought, about the government's failure to act on dumping and on market economy status for China, and said and challenged the minister to say how close we were to midnight as far as the future of the steel industry is concerned, and we'd very much like to hear her response to that. We also had contributions from the honourable gentleman, my honourable friend, the member for Scunthorpe, who pointed out, Mr Rossendale, that it's got much worse since the steel summit, the situation facing the industry, and he listed all the jobs that have been lost in the steel industry since the steel summit was held on October the 16th. And he's someone who speaks with tremendous expertise in relation to the steel industry and should be listened to. We then had a contribution from the honourable gentleman, the member for Brigg and Goole, who I think, who in making a political speech, seemed to be criticising politics being carried out in the House of Commons. He reminded me a bit of Captain Reynard from Casablanca, Mr Rossendale, complaining about gambling going on at Rick's establishment, being shocked by it, or at least feigning shock at politics occurring here. But he has obviously a very close constituency interest in this and works, I know, when we're not perhaps jousting across the chamber, I know he works with colleagues across parties in the interests of his local steelworks. Then we had a speech from my friend, the member for Ogmore, which was a very passionate speech, and he will be a great loss to this place when he hopefully becomes the Assembly member for Ogmore in the near future. But he, I thought, spoke very well about why it was that the government hadn't, when introducing a carbon tax at the same time, introduced the necessary mitigating measures that should have been made at the same time. And he outlined, I think, the scale of the consequences if market economy status is awarded to China without there having been any attempt to leverage from them an end to dumping of steel in European markets. And my honourable friend, who sent me a note, and I know sent a note to you, Mr Rossendale, that she couldn't stay for the whole of the debate, who is the Member of Parliament, of course, for Llanwern Steelworks. She spoke very passionately too and mentioned the work done by the Community Trade Union and Roy Rickus, who I first worked with many years ago when I first became a constituency MP in this House on the Allied Steel and Wire pension problems at that time. And she also mentioned the work being undertaken by the Welsh Government. The honourable gentleman, the member for Carmarthen East and Dynevor, also, I thought, spoke and made an important point about the 9%, the very small 9% tariff that the European Union appears to be planning in relation to rebar. That is too little. It's too late. And I know the minister, saw the minister nodding at the time when he made that criticism, so I hope she'll be able to address that in her remarks as to what the government's doing to try to persuade the Commission that they haven't done enough in relation to these sort of short-term measures. And at the same time, it would be nice to hear from her about what really is going on about the long-term reform of trade defence mechanisms, what the UK government's game really is in relation to that, because it has been, and she nods her head, shakes her head from time to time, but it has been involved in organising a blocking minority within the European Union in relation to the long-term reform of trade defence mechanisms. And if we are to have a future for our steel industry, that reform is going to be absolutely vital. Now, we also heard from the excellent chair of the Select Committee, my honourable friend, the member for Hartlepool, whose excellent report is available at £10 from good bookshops and Her Majesty's stationery office, but also free online. I'm sure he will tell us as well. But he, I thought, really spoke with tremendous knowledge, expertise and passion about the failure of the UK government to push for a coordinated European Union approach in relation to this, and the failure to retain blast furnace capacity at Redcar, which has been lost, as he pointed out, because of the lack of effort by the government. For a sedentary position, the Minister suggests that she's considering nationalising the steel industry in order to achieve these aims. Nationalisation is not necessary. This is not a choice. This is not a choice, Mr. Rossendale, between inaction, laissez-faire approach to the steel industry, and full-scale command economy ownership of all of the means of production in the steel industry. It's about an active industrial policy and about ministers using all their levers, including their influence at their disposal, including every department of government, including the Treasury, including their imaginations, in working with industry in order to bring about the saving of the capacity of this country to produce steel. And that's what's at the heart of this debate. And there's a question that the Minister will have to answer at some point about what the government's view is about the minimum strategic capacity that it believes it can allow the industry to go no further beyond. But I'll come to that question a bit further into my remarks. The Honourable Gentleman from Middlesbrough also, again, if there was a professorship of the blast furnace, he would be the professor of the blast furnace. But he raised questions about what industry is doing, and I think very appropriate questions about what industry is doing. And in his remarks, which bear reading, I think, and studying, he showed a real vision for the future of the British steel industry, and one that the Minister would do well to listen to. My friend and neighbour for Cardiff South and Penarth, who is literally a doughty defender of his constituents, quite rightly referred to the tragedy at the Celsa plant and the deaths of two of the workers there, and also raised the big question about the strategic level at which the British steel industry should be protected. My friend, member for Brennan, spoke well and with clarity and passion, as always, about the human impact of the job losses that are going on at Port Talbot. And to conclude the remarks from other members, the Honourable Lady for Motherwell and Wishaw spoke again with sincerity about her constituents and about the impact these changes will have on them. I thought actually, and perhaps not purposefully, she actually showed the importance of the UK for the future of the steel industry, because for us to have a strategic steel industry, there does have to be a certain level of scale and integration, as my honourable friend, the member for Middlesbrough quite rightly pointed out. Now, who have I missed out? I haven't missed out any of the Conservatives. I think there was only one Conservative who spoke, and I did refer to him. Now, Mr. Rossendale, can I just say that, like many people here, I come from, and anyone from South Wales probably has some sort of link into the steel industry. I come from a family whose life chances were pretty much determined, I think, and very, very strongly influenced by the steel industry. And my father was part of the group of people who helped to build Llanwern Steelworks in 1962. On my birth certificate, his occupation is listed as a plate layer. He was involved in bringing the railway lines that are necessary for an integrated steel plant into Llanwern Steelworks, and then he stayed there and got employment at the new steelworks for the rest of his working life. And indeed, before I went to university, I had an opportunity to go and work at Llanwern Steelworks for 6 months, where I worked mainly in the steel plant, but also as a plate layer in a sort of rather nice kind of rounded end to that period of my life as a plate layer, replacing and maintaining railway lines within the steelworks at Llanwern. And that is why I think you hear Mr. Rossendale, and the Minister understands this, I know, the passion that comes from my honourable friends and colleagues, because they understand how steel underpinned their life chances and the life chances of their constituents and their communities. The availability of well-paid employment in their areas, stable employment, was the foundation, really, of the creation of the life chances of many of my friends and honourable friends who are here today. Now, I'm going to give way to my honourable friend, the member for Neath first, who I forgot to mention because she did make some interventions on behalf of her constituents.
I totally agree with the member about life chances. My father worked at the site of the Steel Company of Wales. The Abbey went to the Steel Company of Wales. Steel Company of Wales moved on to Tata. And when I was a school child, I played hockey for Steel Company of Wales. It was the centre of the community. And the life chances, it put food on the plates for us at home. And the threat of the closure of Trostre, of Port Talbot, is more than I can actually contemplate. The devastating effect to the communities.
Well, she's absolutely right, and I know the Minister understands this, but I think it's important that it's clear why it is that that members feel so passionately about the importance of maintaining the steel industry, both as a strategic asset to the country, but also as the underpinning important basis and foundation of many of the communities we represent.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way, and I think he's making an incredibly eloquent and moving point about how steel is in his blood, as it is in, I think, all honourable members. And as the grandson, both my grandfathers were steel workers in the Hartlepool steel mill. It's important for me personally as well as for my local community. But can we not, Mr Rosendale, fall into the trap of talking about the British steel industry as somehow in the past? This is absolutely vital to make sure that we have a vibrant, competitive steel industry for the future in order to make sure that we remain competitive on the world markets for manufacturing and much of our supply chain.
And my honourable friend is absolutely right. And my point, one of my central points, is the British steel industry is competitive.
Yes, exactly.
It is competitive. And, you know, it wasn't... I would freely admit that the British steel industry of the past often wasn't competitive, and that was often had poor industrial relations, weak management, and sometimes very poor levels of productivity in the distant past. But over the years, it has become one of the most efficient industries anywhere, with some of the best working relationships between workers and employers, because of their understanding of the common interest that binds them together in order to do that, and in fact because of the workforce's desire to make sure that the British steel industry has a future, and being prepared often to make real sacrifices in order to enable that to happen. That's why we have such a competitive steel industry. The only sense in which it isn't competitive is because of the issue that so many people raised in this debate of Chinese dumping of steel being produced well below the cost that it costs for China to produce. China's steelmakers, some 70% of which are state-owned, Mr Rossendale, are not profitable. And it's believed, according to the briefing that we've had for this debate from UK Steel, it's believed they lose close to $34 per tonne on all crude steel produced in China. In 2015, they produced 441 million tonnes more steel than China itself consumed. With China's 101 biggest steel firms lost $11 billion during the first 10 months of 2015. In 2003, China exported 7.2 million tonnes of steel, which was 5% of steel trade between the main global regions. By 2015, total export levels from China have exceeded 107 million tonnes. So that's from 7.2 million tonnes in 2003 to 107 million tonnes. So it is impossible for the highly competitive and efficient British steel industry to be able to compete with a state entity of that size, a country, by the way, which contains 1 in 5 people in the world, to be able to compete with a country determined to use that capacity to kill off its competitors and to destroy the British steel. And that's what's going on whilst ministers are talking to Chinese officials when they were over in the autumn and making the case. But what's going on at the same time that they are smiling and talking about future trade deals is that China is going about and pursuing a policy of deliberately killing off the British steel industry. I'll give way to my honourable friend.
Does my honourable friend agree that if we aren't successful in beating this back in relation to steel, there will be other industries that follow? This is not just about steel. This is about Britain, about Europe saying no and defending our own industries.
I fear she may well be right, and clearly that's what's happening. The Chinese state is absorbing these losses itself in order to kill off the competition. And that's why it's so essential that we have a UK government that understands that and is prepared to take the action necessary to protect the strategic asset that is the UK steel industry. I'll give way to my honourable friend.
I think it's worth remembering that the Redcar blast furnace was actually constructed by the Callaghan government in 1978, 79. We were supposed to have a second blast furnace, which mysteriously disappeared under the change of government. However, in a current world market of effectively free market for China to participate in, it is very interesting to note that the one nation with a state-owned steel industry is dominating that market. Now, that's not a defence of nationalised steel industry, but it's certainly something ministers should pore over in relation to what policies they should be implementing, or regulation, or instruments, or trade defence they should be implementing within that market.
Yes, so my honourable friend is absolutely right in relation to that. And I listened carefully yesterday at Prime Minister's questions to what the Prime Minister said about market economy status. And I think it was quite clear from his tone, demeanour, and indeed his words that the government has already made up its mind that it is going to facilitate and ease the path for market economy status for China, rather than put up a real fight about the British steel industry in relation to market economy status for China. And I'm afraid the Minister sighs, and we all like her immensely, but she sighs and she huffs and she puffs, but anybody with two eyes could see and 2 ears could see and hear what was going on yesterday at Prime Minister's questions. And I'll give way to the honourable gentleman.
But he will also heard the Foreign Secretary say last week that market economy status will be judged through the prism of steel. We need to hold the government to that.
Indeed. And so we need to know what's going on in relation to market economy. Let's have some transparency today from the Minister on what's going on in relation to market economy status. I visited Brussels last week with my honourable friend, the Shadow Secretary of State, in order to talk with officials, including the Britain's European Commissioner, which my honourable friend from Aberavon referred to, and including representatives from UCREP and officials from the Commission and members of the European Parliament. And it is absolutely clear from that visit to us that the UK government currently has the door wide open to Chinese market economy status. I'll give way to my honourable friend briefly.
I think one other important avenue to explore there is what deal exactly did the Prime Minister do with President Xi Jinping on the China visit?
Well, indeed, and again, I'm not sure if the Minister necessarily is party to that, but it would be very interesting to know what she knows about it in her winding-up remarks. So, in a moment, the government must give a much clearer signal, it seems to me, as other honourable members have said, about what its position is in relation to the minimum strategic capacity of the British steel industry. And I'll give way to the honourable gentleman.
I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman for giving way, and he's made some very important points in this debate. But I was just wondering if you could help me out. In November last year, the leader of the Labour Party said to the Labour's Eastern Regional Conference that he was calling for direct government intervention in steel. You know, it's in a position that seems to make complete common sense to me due to the problems in the industry. But yet the First Minister of Wales has completely ruled that out. So as a Welsh MP, can you inform me, does he support the position of his leader here in Westminster or the position of the First Minister in Wales?
Well, I don't think anything that he said is going to solve the dumping problem that we are talking about here and now. And we all understand how Plaid Cymru works in these matters. His only interest here is not actually to speak up for UK steelworkers across England, Wales and Scotland. It's to try and drive a wedge between people in order to make its argument, for a separate Wales, which incidentally, as I said earlier on, along with a separate Scotland, would mean the end of any kind of steel making or strategic capacity for steel making in this country. And the honourable gentleman doesn't like it up him, unfortunately, but he's going to get it if he tries that kind of tactic on me. Now, let me just turn Mr. Rossendale...
Order.
Let me just turn Mr. Rossendale to conclude my remarks so I can leave plenty of time for the Minister to answer the many questions that she's been asked during this. Could she, in addition to asking those questions, explain what the UK government's position is in relation, you've got 25 minutes, in relation to the blocking minority that the UK government has been exercising within the European Union in relation to longer-term reform of trade defence mechanism. She has said throughout, and certainly many times from a sedentary position, that all five of the asks from the now it's 4 of the 5. That 4 of the 5 asks have been completely delivered. Well, I'm afraid that isn't the view of UK Steel, and they've set out in their briefing for this debate that they agree there's been some good progress, and we can all agree there has been some good progress in the meantime. But they've certainly set out quite clearly in their briefing for this debate 5 actions that need to be taken, including more action on anti-dumping measures, action on the market economy status issue, which has been emphasised in debate, business rates for capital-intensive firms to be brought in line with competitors in France and Germany. The Minister says quite right, we need to know when that's going to happen. If she says that's quite right, that is what we need to know. Supporting much more local content in major construction problems and direct funding for the sector on R&D and environmental improvement. So we need to hear about the current position. Now, I'll finish so I leave enough time for Mr. Rossendale. No, I won't give way. I won't give way. I don't give way. We can have a chat outside later if you want. I'll conclude on this. I'll conclude on this point. Will the Minister finally answer the question that she's been asked many times, and which I asked her back in the debate that we had back in October? And that is, what is her view, and what is the government's view about what represents the minimum capacity for steelmaking in the UK's strategic interests? And if she can answer that question and give us clarity on that question, I think everybody would be extremely grateful.